Hello and welcome back to Promotional Whitenoise. We're back in the past to get back to looking at my top 121 video games ever, and we've arrived in 1995. So what's happening in 1995? Well, unknowingly for everybody, it was the beginning of the Armageddon of our society, as the UK surpassed the milestone of 1% of the population having internet access.
I still find it baffling. I hear the word internet and I sort of switch off.
There was no going back from that abyss, folks. A straight line from this.
Dear Mr. President, what shall I write? I know. Best wishes from Blue Peter.
Welcome to the White House, our first online citizen's handbook. I hope you find this a useful way to find answers to your questions.
To this.
My mother twitted my tipples!
And to Promotional Whitenoise. A moment of silence for our civilization.
I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies.
Let's see what else was going on. Oh, is this when we lost Rumbelows? Oh no.
Oh, don't you pay any more, Mrs. Moore? Mrs. Moore, please don't pay any more. The goods are waiting here in rows and rows, and the price is low when you're at Rumbelows.
I mean, something went wrong with Bearings Bank 2 this year, I think, but Rumbelows, man, that one stings.
Our mother said we could be sister and brother. Your name is Deborah, Deborah. It never suited you.
1995 was a truly transitional year. You can see it in the TV. The final episodes of iconic shows happened this year. The Crystal Maze, You Bet, Bullseye, The Word, Mr. Bean, The Krypton Factor, Challenge Annika, and the original form of Come Dancing all air their final episodes in 1995. It also marks the end of Saturday morning kids TV for me, having loved Motormouth and Ghost Train and Going Live and then Live and Kicking. The last two I ever really watched, Parallel 9 and What's Up Doc, as well as the beloved classic kids show Rainbow, also ended this year.
Paint the whole world with a rainbow.
These changes feel entirely appropriate as they fall perfectly in line with me just starting to transform into a teenager. We're moving out of the utterly carefree, joyous, colourful cartoon world of our childhood and into a slightly more thoughtful, more complex, deeper and more conflicted era. Adolescence is a tough time, but there seemed to be an avalanche of media content to appeal to my maturing tastes as the 90s entered its second half. You can see a real shift in the tone when you look at some of the shows that debut in 95. Father Ted starts here.
These are small, but the ones out there are far away.
As does They Think It's All Over and The Mrs. Merton Show, as prime-time entertainment begins to pivot to a slightly more cynical and postmodern take on the traditional panel and talk show formats. We also got the British debut of one of the most quintessentially 90s TV dramas with Due South, which introduced a good deal of surrealism and meta-awareness into the traditional police procedural show.
Through this world I stumbled, so many times betrayed.
Hollyoaks happened, as well as the launch of live TV, this coinciding with the rise of Loaded and FHM magazines, which signalled a new willingness to embrace more explicitly sexualised and less refined content that had previously been gatekept from British media. This would be the first proper realisation of what would become known as lad culture, sweeping away the more small c conservative values across the board in TV and publishing over the next few years. Between them, this all added up to a more mature media landscape that 100% appealed to my interests, and video games were part of this too. A similar, but arguably even more profound shift would occur in the video game space this year when the PlayStation was launched in September. And they weren't ignorant to the fact that their audience had grown up a little and noticed that girls existed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I didn't have a PlayStation until 1996, so we'll talk about that more next time. In 1995, we knew the PlayStation was coming, so our beloved Mega Drives and Super Nintendos were winding down towards the end of their natural lives, with some developers getting the absolute most out of that hardware now they knew it inside out. And of course, PC gaming was still thriving and still giving me all that lovely narrative and strategy content I craved. It's perhaps fitting then that the first two games this month are ones that played considerably better and with more content on other platforms, but the Mega Drive is where I played them, so those are the versions we're looking at. The final two 16-bit games on this list. So let's start the year with one of our last little kiddie indulgences, by going to the park. We've spoken previously about a small part of my fairground experience with the Spanish city. I use the word fairground advisedly because we're not talking about what you'd call a fairground these days. There were dodgems, a merry-go-round, some water games, and a roller coaster that the characters from Final Destination 3 would skip. But that wasn't my sole experience with fun parks. We had an actual theme park nearby, called Lightwater Valley.
Just £2.50 is the inclusive price for a full day of fun at Lightwater Valley, with all games and rides free. You'll love the value, the kids will love the action with as many goes as they like. Lightwater Valley, near Ripon, a great family day out. Fantastic value at £2.50, with all games and rides free.
This was a pretty big deal at one point, as it had the longest roller coaster in Europe, called the Ultimate. Obviously, I never went on that myself. I saw my sister come off it with a nosebleed and just couldn't see the attraction. The Ladybird and the Caterpillar were quite enough for me. But this pales into insignificance because by 1995, I had experienced the theme park, Disney World in Orlando, Florida. Kids love theme parks because essentially they take what's going on inside their heads and make it happen in the real world. What are theme park rides if not toys brought to life? That train set you love playing with, wouldn't it be cool if you could ride on it? What about that scale extric? Want to actually fly around a track at insane speed like that? Or get on a roller coaster? But the American theme parks, Disney and Universal in particular, go even further than bringing your toys to life. They actually bring your imagination to life. The incredible production value in these places make them seem like you're genuinely walking through a child's imagination rather than just a collection of their toys, and that's why they've been so successful for so long. Everyone was into it in 1995. Simply Red made a song about it.
And I love the thought of coming home to you, even if I know we can make it.
It's no wonder then that a lot of us wanted to have a go at making our own theme park, and in 95 we got the chance to do it on the Mega Drive. This was an early project for the famous, or infamous depending on your opinion, Peter Molyneux, who, for better or worse, has become well known for having incredibly ambitious ideas and concepts that perhaps don't always deliver what's promised. Theme Park for me absolutely did. It's unquestionably English in its approach, aiming to be a way of designing a more British concept of the theme park, based around putting a bunch of rides on some farmland in the English countryside, rather than attempting to recreate a grand new world of imagination like the Disney or Universal parks. You start with a plot of land and access to 4 rides, 4 shop stalls, and some scenery items. That's not enough to build the best theme park ever, so you need to make some management decisions about how much of your income to dedicate to research to slowly unlock new attractions. You need to keep an eye on your ticket prices to make sure you're growing your cash reserves but not keeping people away by being too pricey. And you can get really granular in here too. You can set the price of individual food, drink and merch items at each of your shops, and of course, famously, you can increase the level of salt on the fries so people buy more drinks. Or they just sick everything up and create an absolute nightmare for the 1 or 2 handymen you hire to keep the whole place clean. Oh, and these handymen, they're work-shy little bastards. They will actively avoid any area with rubbish or sick in it to go wander down the clean paths or even just piss off into the wilderness, no matter how much you grab them with a little claw and drop them down into the mountain of garbage your family just left.
3 hours later.
And then they have the audacity to get together with the engineers who fix the rides when they break, the entertainers who walk around in costumes, and the security who keep the gangs under control to try and negotiate pay rises. Ooh, lovely, look at that. Master negotiator. But, not entirely surprisingly, they came back for another go. Oh, got done there, boys. Done up like a dressed crab. Well, unfortunately, there's only one thing for it. Bye-bye, Norman. We'll have to get by with one engineer. Don't name the workmen, by the way. This is capitalism, remember. Eventually, you can get access to the track rides, like the roller coaster and the tubing river, which you can design the layout for and set the speed, frequency, and intensity, and you ended up being quite proud of your creations. Although using the 3-button Mega Drive pad made this quite difficult, I spent a long time not being able to figure out how to place the track. I had to go and look in the manual in the end, that's how retro all this is. Unfortunately, once you turned off the machine, that park was lost. There was no ability to save an individual park here. You could save your progress through the different plots of land you can buy, but you couldn't save the park themselves. Every park was a one and done, which severely limited the appeal, but never enough to stop me doing it. There was something about the feeling of trying new layouts and watching all the little people deciding whether or not to go on rides, or to desperately need the toilet and not being able to find one. Looking back, I wonder if this is where my love of leaving Sims in a ladderless pool started. These limitations obviously stem from it being a Mega Drive port of a PC game, which was naturally superior, but that's not where I played it. Though it does show how the consoles were really struggling to provide these new experiences, as they were about to be consigned to the history books by a new generation of hardware. Nevertheless, I spent many hours on this, and if you've never tried it, I highly recommend you do so, though I'd probably play the PC or PlayStation version instead. Not just for the save option, but also because you could see a first-person video of each of the rides. Oh, and did I mention it was sponsored by Midland Bank? Like, aggressively so. Bet you didn't remember that.
We are returning to the arena where our religion began. We have one hope, one dream, one vision.
I've mentioned previously that Kevin Keegan arriving at Newcastle United as manager was one of the most important things that happened in 1992, and here in 1995 we can see why. Newcastle's rise from the bottom of England's second tier to the top of the newly established Premier League just happened to coincide with an explosion in popularity and media presence of football more generally. The Premier League and Sky Sports' investment in it meant that football became glamorous and cool and entertaining in ways it hadn't previously been perceived as being. We had footballers labelled the Spice Boys because of their embrace of a newly found celebrity status, and talented players from exotic places all over the world were flocking to play in England. And all this was happening as Keegan had assembled a championship-challenging team full of exciting players to watch. So much so that even in the most entertaining league in the world, Newcastle became known as the Entertainers. So it's fair to say that this was a peak in my interest in the beautiful game. All of this also happened to coincide with video games finally getting to grips with how to properly simulate football, not just as a management sim, but as an action game where you could really get stuck in and play as your heroes. Before EA Sports released FIFA International Soccer in late '93, football on the home consoles had tended to play from quite a simple top-down view, like in Sensible Soccer or World Cup Italia '90. This was fun, but quite a bit of imagination was required to turn what was essentially an animated team tactics board into a proper game of football in your head. You couldn't really see the players, they were just little blobs. You couldn't see anything much of the crowd or surroundings, and the trappings of this modern day entertainment football were missing. FIFA changed all of that by bringing in the isometric view, so you could see the full bodies of the players with fully animated arms and legs. They rendered a crowd of sorts with sound effects to match.
Oh, he's hit that. It's in!
As well as some simple commentary on the PC version.
Ellis. Played by Ellis. Penetrating ball.
They even added a bit of flair with the animated scoreboard sequences after key incidents like cards and goals. This was more a feature of American soccer stadiums, but it moved the football game in the direction of a more stylish and appealing presentation. Although it's questionable how much some of these had to do with football at all. I love seeing a good Adidas Predator ad. I mean, remember how much you wanted a pair of those? But this is just straight up an ad for Panasonic in the middle of the match. At this stage, the gameplay itself was still a very simple 2-button pass or shoot affair, with the computer doing a lot of the work interpreting what should be happening. But it was still addictive in an action arcadey way. FIFA 95 came along in 1994, beginning the trend of each release bearing the name of the following year, and introduced the ability to play as club teams instead of just countries. That was key to capitalising on the popularity of the Premier League here in the UK. And in 1995, they released another iteration that would become one of my most played footy games ever. At first glance, FIFA 96 on the Mega Drive doesn't seem that different from 95, but the FIFA games have always been about iterative improvement more than revolutionary change. Other versions on different platforms had much more significant improvements. Using the power of the PlayStation or PC, FIFA 96 used an actual 3D engine, known as Virtual Stadium, to provide the first proper 3D representation of a football game. But I struggled to get the PC version working, to be honest, and as we already discussed, I wouldn't have a PlayStation until next year. But while the Mega Drive version uses the FIFA 95 engine, the most important improvement for me was present: the use of real player names. Both the original FIFA International Soccer and the 95 update had used fictional names as the team licenses didn't cover the players. But here in 96, you really could play as your heroes, fully licensed and present. And that was important as footballer celebrity status was at an all-time high. The ability to build your own teams and squads, as well as selecting who got to play for England, it just held far more appeal when you were dealing with the proper representations of real footballers. Look at this team here. How's this for a fantasy 90s Premier League team? There were minor gameplay improvements too, with the game playing smoother, being a bit more realistic with different strengths of pass and the ability for passes to go astray if you weren't careful. And you could score a range of different kinds of goal, from outside the box screamers to tap-ins and even headers from crosses. But the expanded range of game modes was the real draw. Now you could take a team, real or custom made, with your own name and shirt design and everything, through a full season of football, with a league table and simulated matches and everything. This all seems very basic now, but it was the first time you could do it, and it brought the experience so much closer to the real thing, because you could get fully engaged with the fiction of the league happening inside your console. It ignited that same imagination I was talking about during my review of On the Ball, the first football management game I played on PC. But here you could do it while being more actively engaged with the matches themselves. FIFA 96 took football games from one-off fun kickabouts to a more complete recreation of real-world football and football coverage. And that makes it comfortably one of the 121 best video games of all time. And here in the present, like every FIFA game, it works as an amazing time capsule for any football fan, as you can scroll through the squads and remind yourself who was playing with who. Good times.
in a second-hand set of dimensions. In an astral plane that was never meant to fly.
Everyone has a different story about how they came to Terry Pratchett's Discworld series here in the UK. If you were a kid in the 90s, you read some of them, maybe you even read all of them. There weren't as many then as there are now. I was very fortunate because the first few, the ones that established the world and the lore, were freely available in my school library. Don't get me the wrong idea, it's not like I went to some palatial private school. But back then even modest comprehensives had decently stocked libraries that carried not just educational textbooks, but also a selection of kids and young adult fiction. This was before Harry Potter had gotten children back into the habit of reading, so any way to get them face down in the pages of a book was greatly encouraged. So I had read a few of the Discworld novels by the time the game was released for the PC, and as it was at the time the only adaptation of the stories into a visual medium, it was a very exciting prospect. For the uninitiated, the Discworld books are a gently satirical series of fantasy novels poking fun at contemporary Britain of the 80s and 90s through the lens of a comedic medieval land known as the Discworld, which is a flat disc on the back of a giant turtle hurtling through space. With this backdrop, Pratchett can take a side-eyed view of different aspects of our culture in each novel, such as the notion of monarchy, the structure of law enforcement, and even the nature of death. Pratchett's gift was that he was able to keep these concepts light enough to be enjoyed by children, while still providing a solid bit of satire, and enough sci-fi and fantasy concepts to get them really thinking.
Probably as people think that fantasy just means wizards and guys with big muscles and long swords. And I was reading one of those books one day and I thought, this is not real. Let's try and make fantasy real. Let's say, what's it like to be Conan the Barbarian when you're 89? You know, it's a bit uncomfortable with the hemorrhoid ring on the saddle. You know, your back keeps giving way at the vital moment. And I thought, there are so many cliches in the fairy tale view of fantasy, of the wizards and the witches and so forth, that it may be fun just to treat them as if they were real life.
Of all the British institutions poked, prodded and lampooned in these books, it's perhaps the notion of higher education that takes the most frequent flack, with the Discworld's unseen university being where the wizards are taught magic by a thoroughly lazy and clueless bunch of elder magic men with giant beards, who suckle off the public teat to live in relative luxury and contribute next to nothing to society as a whole. You can decide how accurate or not that is for yourself, but it provides a good deal of the comedy of the first few novels and also the setting for the game.
What? Oh, they were wonderful pickles. How dare you cast aspersions on them? I've lost it. What were we talking about again?
Pickles?
What's pickled? What? What do you mean?
Well, the eels were pickled, weren't they?
What? Pickled elves? Damn their ears. I told them to lock that liquor cupboard. Go on, boy, get after them.
You play as Rincewind the Wizard, a student or maybe member of the faculty who's been here for many years and has yet to find proper employment. As such, you get to set about foiling a plot to summon a dragon and have it go on a murderous rampage. How do you do that? Well, it's a point and click, so you collect seemingly meaningless objects and combine them in bizarre ways to drive forward a pre-written story. Look, we've talked about this kind of game before. They're either your thing or they're not, and Discworld realistically isn't going to change your mind. There's no drastic innovations or surprises in the way the game plays out, but it does have the unique advantage of being able to boast the voice acting talent of some of the most prominent and well-respected British comedians and comedic actors of the time. It's possible I didn't fully appreciate back then just how incredible the cast was, because I hadn't grown up with Monty Python. I'm slightly too young for that. But as the game released on CD-ROM, still a bit of a novelty in '95 with many games still coming out on multiple floppy disks, it allowed for fully voicing every character. Eric Idle was the main protagonist Rincewind, so you hear him more than anyone else and he turns in a really good performance.
Another busy day in the faculty, gentlemen?
We are cogitating.
I hope I heard that right, said in a knowing tone of voice, nudge nudge.
Cogitating, my lad, is that process by which the wise make space inside their minds for more ideas.
You make more space for ideas by sitting on your backside sipping a cup of milky tea.
Hit him. Hit him.
You also get Tony Robinson out of Blackadder.
Poppycock, there's no such thing. Dragons only exist if you believe in them. I don't believe in them, they don't believe in me. So we're both happy.
Rob Brydon out of literally everything, including all the adverts you've ever seen.
For just £9.50 you can get away with the sun. What do you think of that?
And John Pertwee, who was the Doctor.
Hey? A girl? What's a girl doing in here?
I'm not a girl.
Why are you wearing a dress?
It's a wizard's robe, not a dress.
I knew a girl's dress once. Splendid lass. Very good at pickling.
That's a pretty incredible lineup, and if you happen to be British, of course, it's even more impressive, and it was a big selling point for the game. After all, if you're going to play something that's mostly story, why not have the cream of UK comedy perform it for you?
Are you all right?
Pardon? Oh, yes. Never felt better. So, can I help you at all, sir? Anything special catch your eye?
Oh, just browsing.
Browsing?
Yes.
Not plotting?
Definitely not.
Not secretly planning the overthrow of the patrician and the total dominance of the city?
No, not at all.
Oh, damn. Right you are, sir. Browse away.
It gave this game a big budget feel, and a sense of being more of a cartoon adaptation of the Discworld than a game. This all fits in with how, over the next few years, games would strive to become more cinematic, and they would ape many of the aspects of film and television using the newfound graphical technology at their disposal. And this was an early example, along with The Dig, which also came out this year. It's visually along similar lines to the LucasArts games of the time, with exaggerated perspective in the backgrounds to make small screen spaces feel like large open areas to explore. And they did a great job of using the Josh Kirby original covers of the novels as inspiration for the visual style without it being entirely a copy. Kirby would actually be employed to illustrate the covers of all the Discworld games, so it really did feel in keeping with the series visually, despite none of them being written by Pratchett himself. It's not a perfect game, this one. Greg Barnett does a capable writing job as a Pratchett stand-in, but lacks the satirical bite of the main man, perhaps intentionally for a game aimed more at children. The puzzles are also on the obscure side, and it's easy to get stuck. You forget that back in the day, this was often on purpose, as they had lovely big shiny strategy guides to sell, before more than 1% of us had the internet. To be fair, not every bit of the performances are great either. You can tell it was recorded in quite a short period of time, as there are moments when it seems the actor wasn't certain about the context of a scene. And these haven't been re-recorded, so there are strange emphases and intonations here and there. But overall, it's a lovely, colourful and funny introduction to the visual adaptation of the Discworld. And there's enough great stuff here to establish it as one of the top 121 video games of all time.
It's not good. It doesn't look good.
I'm losing control. I can't control it.
It's not good. It doesn't look good.
I'm losing control. I can't control it.
War never changes. Well, young boys' love of war games never changes. We all go through a war games phase. I remember being about 11 years old when I insisted on getting a full camo outfit with dog tags, because a chubby blonde kid in Northern England with unmanageable hair looks so cool in camo. At least the dog tags might help identify me once I was literally bullied to death for being such a dweeb. And perhaps also for using the word dweeb. My love of war games and all things military happily coincided with a bunch of different outlets for such an interest, and the most exciting of these was Warhammer 40,000. Yeah, I got seriously caught up in the Warhammer mania here in the UK in the early 90s, 2nd edition specifically, and I became really enamoured with the idea of having my very own army at home, with marines and tanks and planes and all kinds of different units with different strengths and weaknesses. While the game seemed like a lot of fun if you really got into it, it was very complicated and I was quite young, so this hobby largely remained one of making and painting the models and then using my imagination to do the rest. The deep and incredible lore of Warhammer 40k made this more of an option than it would have been in some other tabletop tactics game, as it was easy to get lost in the storytelling, even just what was in the rulebook. It's probably not surprising then that when I discovered a video game where you could build a huge number of troops, tanks, planes, and units with different abilities and weaknesses, assemble them into an army and fight battles in real time, I sunk an unhealthy amount of time into it. Command & Conquer wasn't the first real-time strategy war game, but it did blow the genre up into massive mainstream success. Westwood Studios learned a lot from their first attempt, Dune, and then applied it to an original story set in a near-future scenario, so the late 90s I guess, where the discovery of a new energy source creates a dangerous terrorist group looking to control it, the Brotherhood of Nod, and the formation of a NATO-style alliance of Western nations to stop them, GDI. These two factions provide the core of the game and give the player two totally different campaigns to play through, famously held together narratively with some of the greatest FMV sequences of all time.
Oh, is that good or bad? Ooh, let me put it this way, Eddie. The possibilities of Tiberium are limitless.
Look, I know they've become a bit of a meme these days, but honestly these sequences were really important. It was part of that shift towards the cinematic in-game storytelling I mentioned earlier, and it made it much easier to get invested in the gameplay. Joe Kukan created an iconic villain in Kane, and you had a reason to keep playing and getting better and winning the war, because you could see the people involved and the effects it had. So the FMV sequences are an irreplaceable part of the experience. They found that out when they made Generals. But if that's all the game was, just a fun, novel, cheesy war story with videos, then it wouldn't have persisted so long. Truth is, this was just an awesome presentation for what was a beautifully balanced and engrossing tactical experience, requiring just enough quick decision making and knowledge of the armies to make it a significant challenge, but not punishing you too hard for just grabbing all your units and launching a blitzkrieg on the enemy if you do it quick enough. For someone who was into Warhammer miniatures but wasn't insanely rich, it was amazing because I didn't have to save up for ages to get a new tank to play with. I just clicked a button. Then there's new units coming along all the time to enjoy at no additional cost. That sounds a bit dumb now, I know, but it was a fairly new idea at the time. This would set the template for real-time strategy for many years, significantly within its own franchise, which went on a very long time, but also well beyond it. Every unit has a strength and a way to counter that strength, with the two armies balancing perfectly but also feeling completely distinct. They were able to make the Brotherhood feel like an insurgent force with fewer resources, hence their units are weaker and can't take as much of a beating, but they're quicker, and some even have stealth technology. GDI feel suitably rich and powerful, with strongly armoured units and air superiority, but Nod rocket troopers can put a serious dent in any air force you care to deploy. As you progress through the story campaign, you get multiple branching paths and get introduced to more and more advanced and exciting units, which means you learn how to use them at the right pace, so that by the end, you're fielding a huge force of multiple different units using multiple tactical approaches without even realising how much you've learned and how much your skill has increased. You could even take on friends if you had PCs connected via a LAN. As we mentioned earlier, these were early days for the internet in the UK, but we did hear tell of some incredible multiplayer skirmishes at LAN parties, although that wasn't really my thing. This is another game that kicked off an enormous franchise, and we will talk about the other entries in the series as we move forward. But as tends to be the case, this is probably the most pure Command & Conquer experience. Other games in the series introduce new concepts, more factions, internet multiplayer, and even some amazing new stories. But perhaps the definitive C&C experience is right here. If you haven't played this, get yourself the remastered version on Steam. It'll comfortably be one of the best games you've ever played, as it is for me.
up, one. Have an alien attack situation.
Open ocean door.
Stand by.
Boy Barracuda 01.
Barracuda 01 launched.
Maintain radio contact.
Barracuda 01 Ace. Approach Hyperion, or at least what's left of her. Going out there. Let me take a look.
Hey Jake, be careful.
Airlock here. Oh my god.
Jake. Jake, you read me, Jake. Jake. Jake, come in.
You ever see a film sequel and think, huh, this is just the first one again, but with like a different colour scheme or something? You know, something like The Hangover 2, that contorts itself into knots to cover all the exact same plot points and jokes and characters from the first, despite it making no sense to be happening a second time, but in Bangkok now. Maybe even something good like Ocean's 13, where they go back to the same place, do the same thing, make the same jokes, but Al Pacino now. XCOM Terror from the Deep is XCOM 2, and it's what we in the modern day would call a reskin, which is to say it's exactly the same game, but with different textures and descriptions on everything. The original had been an unexpected hit, so Microprose wanted a sequel and they wanted it fast. Terror from the Deep was made in not much more than 6 months by their internal studio, while the original developers, Mythos Games and the legendary Julian Gollop, worked on a proper sequel for the third title, which we will discuss in time. Was there anything unique or worth remarking on about this one then? Well, yes, actually. It was even more ball-breakingly, skull-crackingly, life-alteringly difficult than the first game. Apparently this was because players had complained that the first one was too easy, and it seems this was before people had realised that gamers that complain that things are too easy are all total bullshit artists trying to look big and clever in front of their mates. So Microprose took these imbeciles seriously and upped the difficulty, making this one next to impossible. More importantly, the story presentation allowed the game to feel expanded over the first one in ways it simply wasn't. It played a clever trick on us by giving the impression of having far more environments to explore, while cunningly reusing maps and assets in ways our poor innocent little child minds couldn't really fathom. The story sees a victorious XCOM from the first game face a new threat, as apparently a signal launched from Mars by the dying aliens at the climax of Enemy Unknown had awakened a long-dormant race of aliens that were in hibernation under the oceans of Earth. So now XCOM has to battle new forms of aliens, both on land and under the sea, using new subaquatic weaponry and researching new tech to triumph for a second time. Right off the bat, you're asking questions. Important questions, such as why the mighty XCOM organisation, who ended the last game wearing Terminator armour and boasting plasma weaponry that could crack a planet open, now take to the seas armed with simple harpoons and pellet guns. The answer is that the same game loop of intercept, mission, capture, tech research and manufacture must be maintained, but it does put a little dent in the storytelling. Ultimately that loop though is just as satisfying as it was before, so you don't really mind having to suspend your disbelief even more. And to be fair, there are more varied environments here to a degree. You do battle the aliens underwater using your transport sub and weapons like ghost guns, but you also have to do some missions on land, where some of those specialist water-based weapons don't work, so it adds a bit of complexity to the research priority strategy, as well as managing how much of what you keep in storage. Some of the environments are considerably more interesting than the endless farmland and small towns from the first game too. Here you get to do some missions on cruise ships when the aliens decide to launch terror attacks, and while the increased complexity of these maps with multiple indoor levels and rooms make the game even harder, the visual interest does offset it to a degree, and it keeps you having a good time. Unless you're doing one of the new multi-stage missions that can string up to 3 separate tactical battles together without being able to return to base in between. Then you're not having so much fun. Oh, and again, what have I told you about naming your soldiers? Don't do it.
Oh, this was a big river. I want you all to know that I was proud.
This entry also introduced melee weapons, working much the same way as the stun rod in the first game, but dealing damage instead of knocking them out. To this day, I have no clue how or why anyone would use these weapons. You'd never get close enough to an alien before being turned into a fine pink mist for one thing, and even then, if you did, how much damage are you going to do? And what do you think's going to happen when the turn ends? Utter madness. This is some Billy taking on the Predator with his bare hands shit, and will usually end up about the same way. Once again, it's the fascinating premise, the well-presented tech info and lore in the extensive UFOpedia, and the ultra-satisfying progression from outgunned underdog to dominant military power that makes this game so addictive, despite its many flaws. And none of that has been diluted in this sequel. Later on, when the Men in Black film came out in '97, a close friend of mine said it was a bit like someone had made a film out of XCOM. That might sound silly now, as it was just about an alien invasion, but at the time there really was nothing like it. The notion of managing and organising a broader, more overarching force like that, over in-game years, rather than just getting stuck into an action game as a lone character. XCOM was great, and more of it was only a good thing, even if it was at times very, very, very annoying. You might have noticed that I like my sci-fi. I've always loved sci-fi, always preferred it to fantasy. I adore the notion of projecting forward, thinking about how people might live in the future, where we might be, what we might be doing long after I'm dead. I don't know why it appeals to me so much, but it does. I guess it kind of makes all the worries and anxieties of the present feel a bit less important. And so it follows that I love Star Trek. Yes, I'm a cliched, stereotypical nerd, but I'm comfortable with it. It's safe to say that Star Trek was, and still is, at its best, my favourite television show of all time. I'm of an age that I never really watched the original series with Kirk and Spock. That seemed like it required a little too much investment to overcome the 1960s aesthetic, it being so far removed from the look and feel of contemporary fiction in the 1990s. The Next Generation, however, was able to bring Star Trek into my present and provide an irresistible gateway to a universe of deep, thoughtful, provocative, emotional and meaningful stories which, at their best, tackled life, death, faith, science, progress, and human connection in ways no other popular long-running franchise ever has. Now that we're so far past it, it's easy to underestimate the importance of Star Trek, but it had an enormous impact. NASA named their first space shuttle Enterprise after the show, and the mobile phone as we know it today would not exist had this TV program not inspired its creation. I decided to pursue a career in science largely because of Star Trek, and on a personal level for a long time, I considered Jean-Luc Picard to be an ideal male role model. I looked up to that character and wanted to emulate his stoicism, level-headed pragmatism and knowledgeability. The notion of a man of science, who was also educated in literature and classics, and allowed those things to inform his command decision-making, that felt like what an adult was, and it was a very positive thing for any child to aspire to. Of course, there's nothing like that in the streaming content that now carries the name Star Trek, as the franchise I'm referring to ended in 2005, with the cancellation of prequel series Enterprise, which was arguably the weakest attempt at making Star Trek, which, I remind you, ended in 2005 and has not appeared again since. So, back to 1995. How do you make a video game out of a TV series that is largely about philosophy, politics, diplomacy, and the big ideas of existence? Well, you make a point-and-click adventure game, obviously.
Introducing Star Trek: The Next Generation, a final unity on PC CD-ROM. Take the bridge.
Make it so.
Explore fascinating new worlds. Unravel alien mysteries and defend the Starship Enterprise. To boldly go where no one has gone before. A final unity from Spectrum Holobyte. An original interactive adventure with the actual voices of all the crew.
I'm Commander Riker of the Federation Starship Enterprise. Can you help us find the original fifth scroll?
I can let you see the true copy made by Baranon.
our sect's founder.
We're doing this for historical research. I'm sure you understand that no matter how good your copy is, we need to check the original for authenticity.
This was quite a smart decision looking back, as there'd been some truly dreadful attempts at adapting Star Trek on the 8 and 16-bit consoles. They all fell back onto what they knew from gaming, which was that there has to be shooting, or else it's not a game. The problem with that is, if it's mostly shooting, it's mostly not Star Trek. Uninspired platforming on the DS9 game and unintuitive busywork on the next-gen offerings meant that the only real success to that point had been the Star Trek 25th Anniversary adventure game on PC, and its sequel Judgment rights. These games captured the tone of the original show, not just by getting the actors to reprise their roles, for the CD-ROM re-release anyway, but by basing the game around using your brain, solving puzzles and unravelling mysteries.
I don't suppose you'd enjoy the psychological release of a few good belly laughs, Spock. We could open the canister right here if you like.
I would strongly recommend against it, Doctor.
It allowed players to take in the story at their own pace and make it feel like you are genuinely exploring the world of Star Trek. A Final Unity does much the same thing for the next generation crew.
It's a neutronium hull, all right, and a powerful energy source. I've never seen that much power in such a small package before.
Right away, the presentation was stunning for the time, setting itself up as an episode of the show, complete with opening title sequence, and even the post-intro credits that would pop up with the title of the episode. All the principal cast reprised their roles as the main crew, and since the game was released on CD-ROM, every line of dialogue is spoken aloud.
The preserve clearly embodies your philosophy of life forms living within life forms to create a single harmonious organism. It is an impressive achievement.
I remember being impressed with the performances too. I never got the sense anyone was phoning it in because it was just a video game. All of these guys sound exactly like they do in the show, and that makes a big difference.
We're within sensor range of the Mertens orbital station, sir.
On screen. Miss LaForge?
LaForge here.
Report. What is the condition of the station?
You're looking at what's left of the Mertens orbital station, one of the largest research centers in the Federation.
There are, notably, a few different gameplay elements to get to grips with here. First and foremost, there's a point-and-click adventure, and this makes up the bulk of the runtime, as you spend a good chunk of the game on away missions to space stations and alien planets.
We did it. Now what took you so long to find me?
On the Enterprise, the game is largely dialogue choice-based, allowing you to ask questions of crew and guests to discover the lore and clues on how to proceed, but also forcing you to negotiate through some tense situations, such as a standoff with a Garidian warbird right at the start of the game. There are many ways this can go, and your choices do matter. You can play it cool and convince the warbird to withdraw, or you can get aggressive and start a fight.
The warbird is hailing us. Ignore that. They are loading their torpedo tubes. Evasive maneuvers.
That's where the third gameplay type comes in. Ship combat in a Final Unity is, let's face it, not great. You can issue orders to do specific maneuvers or take direct control and move about with the keyboard, but it's extremely basic and it's easy to get a bit lost in the starscape while the enemy just blasts away at you from distance. There are some nice touches here though, like how you can adjust the power levels between weapons, shields and propulsion. This actually has an impact on how quickly you can get places even at warp, and these systems would be fleshed out in later games like Bridge Commander. Anyway, you can, fortunately, leave the fighting to Mr. Worf, who will usually see you alright, unless you recklessly charge into Romulan space and get into it with 3 or 4 warbirds at once. You see, that's another aspect of the game I found amazing at the time. You can go to astronavigation and travel to absolutely any part of the known Star Trek universe at any time. You don't have to follow the critical path, you can just warp wherever you like. There's no reason to, there's no cool hidden resources to collect, no special side missions waiting for you on SETI Alpha 5, but you can go there. They even modelled star bases where you can go to get repaired after a fight, and this made it feel like you were actually in command of the Enterprise, rather than just working through another story set on it. Eventually though, you realise there's nothing left to do but follow the rest of the story, and it's actually a pretty good one, with some interesting in-universe ramifications. Turns out an ancient civilization known as the Chodak have reappeared, and have spooked the Romulans into outfitting their entire fleet for speed and racing through Federation space to find a massive machine known as the Unity device. Of course, everyone else is looking for it too, including Picard and co. And those who know their Trek very well will recognise this as cribbing a lot from an episode called The Chase, but as that was a very good episode, I didn't mind too much. Suffice to say, this is a fantastic adventure filled with colourful characters and faithful recreations of the crew. Its puzzles aren't too taxing, and it's a thrill to be in charge of the Enterprise. This is easily the best Star Trek video game ever made, and it isn't close. Hey, you can even go into the holodeck to watch all the cutscenes you've unlocked. Come on now, 11 out of 10.
Until our next encounter.
Until then.
It would seem that we are not completely dissimilar after all. In our hopes or in our fears.
Yes.
Well then, perhaps one day.
One day.
And that was my 1995 in gaming. Let me know down in the comments if there were more important games to you in 1995, maybe I'll check them out. And it's also the end for the 16-bit consoles. There are no more games on the list from the Super Nintendo or the Mega Drive. It's inarguable that without those two consoles specifically taking gaming into the mainstream of popular culture, nothing any of us know today about video games would happen. They refined the 8-bit experiences into something marketable with broad appeal, and began so many of the franchises and the experiences we enjoy to this day. But time is the never-ending river that never stops flowing, and we're moving into the third dimension with the 32-bit machines and 3D graphics cards. So here's to you lads, and we'll see you next time in 1996 on Promotional Whitenoise.
Once we dance.